The scorching August sun beat down on Margaret Keller's shoulders as she paced outside the doctor's office in Eureka, Nevada, clutching her 5-year-old son's worn stuffed rabbit while tears threatened to spill from her exhausted eyes. 2 days of fever had ravaged little William's small body, and Margaret had nothing left to give: no money, no valuables, just desperate hope and the wedding band she'd refused to part with even during the leanest times. Margaret's hands trembled as she pushed open the door to Dr. Anderson's office, the little bell announcing her arrival with a cheerfulness that mocked her desperation. William lay motionless on the examination table, his usually rosy cheeks now pale and sunken. His dark curls, so like his father's, stuck to his forehead with sweat. "Mrs. Keller, Dr. Anderson began, his voice grave as he removed his spectacles. "Your boy has a severe case of typhoid. He needs medicine, proper care, and monitoring. I can provide that, but how much?" Margaret interrupted, already knowing the answer would be more than she had. $20 for the medicine and my services." The doctor's expression softened slightly. "I know it's a substantial sum, but $20, Margaret whispered, her voice breaking. Her mind raced through calculations she'd already made a dozen times. The drought had killed her small garden, and her husband Thomas had been dead for 2 years now, taken by the same mining accident that had claimed 5 other men in town. Her seamstress work barely brought in enough to feed them. "I have $3.42, Dr. Anderson's face remained compassionate but firm. "Mrs. Keller, I can't." The door behind them swung open, the bell jingling again as a tall figure stepped inside, bringing with him the scent of leather, horses, and the open range. "Pardon the interruption," the man said, removing his hat to reveal sun-streaked brown hair. Margaret recognized him as Samuel Morris, one of the cowboys who occasionally brought cattle through Eureka. She'd seen him in town a few times, noticed how he always tipped his hat to ladies on the street, and once helped old Mrs. Peterson carry her groceries. He wasn't from around here, rumor had it. He worked for the big Diamond G Ranch about 50 miles south. The cowboy's eyes moved from the doctor to Margaret's tear-streaked face and then to William's small form on the table. Something in his expression shifted. "Madam," he said with a gentle nod to Margaret before turning to Dr. Anderson. "I couldn't help but overhear. The boy needs medicine, Dr. Anderson nodded. "Typhoid. I have what he needs, but—" Samuel Morris reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather wallet. Without hesitation, he counted out $20 and placed them on the doctor's desk. "That should cover it," he said simply. Margaret stared at him in disbelief. "Mr. Morris, I can't possibly—" "You can pay me back when you're able, Mrs. Keller, Margaret Keller." She swallowed hard. "And this is my son William." "Well, Mrs. Keller, William needs that medicine now, not when you can afford it." His voice was matter-of-fact, but his eyes were kind. "Dr. Anderson, I'd appreciate if you'd get started right away." The doctor nodded, gathering his supplies while Margaret stood frozen, torn between pride and necessity. William's weak cough made the decision for her. "Thank you," she whispered to the cowboy. "I'll find a way to repay you." Samuel Morris placed his hat back on his head. "I'll check in tomorrow to see how the boy's doing." He tipped his hat and walked out, the bell announcing his departure. Margaret sat beside her son as Dr. Anderson prepared the medicine. She held William's small hand and wondered about the cowboy who had just saved her son's life. She had nothing to give him in return, nothing but gratitude, and a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. Samuel Morris hadn't planned on staying in Eureka for more than a night. He delivered a message from his boss at the Diamond G Ranch and intended to ride out at dawn. But as he rode away from the doctor's office, the image of Margaret Keller's worried face and her sickly son kept him from making preparations to leave. Instead, he found himself securing a room at the Silver Dollar boarding house for a few more nights. Something about the widow and her son tugged at him, and it wasn't just charity or pity. There was a quiet strength in her eyes that had caught his attention the few times he'd seen her around town. The next morning, Samuel walked back to Dr. Anderson's office. The bell jingled as he entered, finding the doctor writing in his ledger. "Mr. Morris," Dr. Anderson greeted him. "I figured you might stop by. Mrs. Keller and William are still here. The boy needed monitoring through the night." Samuel nodded. "How is he?" "The fever broke around midnight. He's weak but improving." The doctor gestured toward a door at the back. "They're in the recovery room. Mrs. Keller hasn't left his side." Samuel hesitated, suddenly feeling like an intruder. "Perhaps I should come back later." "Nonsense. I'm sure she'd appreciate knowing who to thank properly." Dr. Anderson stood and led him to the small room where Margaret sat in a chair beside a narrow bed, her hand resting on her sleeping son's arm. When she looked up, Samuel was struck by the deep fatigue etched on her face. Despite this, she was undeniably beautiful. Deep brown eyes set in a face framed by chestnut hair that had partially escaped its pins. She stood quickly, smoothing her simple blue dress. "Mr. Morris," she said softly, careful not to wake William. "I didn't expect to see you again so soon." "Just wanted to see how the boy was doing," Samuel replied, keeping his voice low. "Thanks to you, he's going to be fine." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "I don't know how to thank you properly." Samuel shuffled his feet, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "No need for thanks, Mrs. Keller. Anyone would have done the same. But they didn't. You did." She studied his face with an intensity that made him want to look away. Why? The question caught him off guard. Why indeed? Samuel had known plenty of folks in need during his 32 years. He'd helped when he could, but never like this, never with such immediate certainty. "I suppose I know what it's like to need help and not be able to ask for it," he finally said. "My mother raised 3 boys alone after my father died in the war. Times were hard." Margaret nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Still, $20 is a great deal of money. I've been fortunate lately. The Diamond G pays well." He glanced at William, whose color looked better than the day before. "How long will he need to stay here, doctor?" "Anderson says we can go home tomorrow if William continues to improve," Margaret sighed. "Then I'll have to figure out how to work while caring for him." Samuel hesitated, then said, "I could help if you'd allow it. I'm staying in town a few more days." Margaret's eyes widened slightly. "You've already done more than enough, Mr. Morris." "Samuel," he corrected gently, "and it's no trouble. I've got time on my hands." She studied him for a moment, weighing his offer. "I live in a small house at the edge of town. It's not much, but you're welcome to stop by. Perhaps for dinner tomorrow evening. It's the least I can do." Samuel smiled, tipping his hat. "I'd be honored, Mrs. Keller." "Margaret," she replied with the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her face, reaching her eyes and lighting something within them that made Samuel momentarily forget to breathe. "Tomorrow evening then, Margaret." As he walked back to the boarding house, Samuel wondered what had possessed him to accept her invitation. He wasn't the type to get involved in other people's lives. Being a cowboy meant freedom, movement, no attachments. Yet here he was, extending his stay in a town where he had no business, all because of a widow and her sick boy. Margaret watched Samuel Morris leave, conflicting emotions swirling within her. Gratitude, certainly, but also an uncomfortable awareness of how handsome he was, tall and lean but strong, with kind blue eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. She hadn't noticed a man that way since Thomas died, and the realization made her feel both disloyal and strangely alive. William stirred, drawing her attention back to her son. His eyes fluttered open, clearer than they had been in days. "Mama," he whispered. "I'm here, sweetheart." She stroked his forehead, relieved to find it cooler. "Who was that man?" Margaret smiled softly. "That was Mr. Morris. He helped us when we needed it." William's brow furrowed. "Is he nice?" "Yes," Margaret said, surprised by how certain she felt. "I believe he is very nice indeed." The next day, Dr. Anderson discharged William with strict instructions for rest and plenty of fluids. Margaret settled her son at home, tucking him into bed with promises of reading his favorite stories later. Then she set about preparing dinner, grateful for the chicken and vegetables Dr. Anderson's wife had sent along. She was just starting to worry that she didn't have enough food to properly thank her benefactor when a knock came at the door. Margaret smoothed her hair and straightened her best dress, the one she usually saved for Sundays, before opening the door. Samuel stood on her porch, hat in hand, looking freshly shaven. In his arms was a paper-wrapped package. "Hope you don't mind," he said by way of greeting. "I stopped by the general store and picked up a few things. Thought you might need supplies." Margaret hesitated, pride warring with practicality. "You've already done so much. Consider it a get-well gift for William." His smile was warm and without pity. She stepped aside to let him in, accepting the package with murmured thanks. Inside she found sugar, coffee, flour, and a small wooden toy horse that must have been meant for William. Her small home suddenly felt even smaller with Samuel's presence filling it. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with 2 doors leading to the bedrooms, hers and William's. It was clean but worn, with patches of the worn carpet visible where rugs didn't quite cover the floor. "It's not much," she said, feeling the need to apologize. "It's a home," Samuel replied, looking around with appreciation rather than judgment. "That's more than many have." William's bedroom door opened and the boy appeared, still in his nightclothes but looking stronger than he had at the doctor's office. "William, you should be in bed," Margaret scolded gently. "I heard voices." His eyes fixed on Samuel with childish curiosity. "Are you Mr. Morris?" Samuel crouched down to be at eye level with the boy. "I am, but you can call me Samuel. Your mother tells me you've been quite sick." William nodded solemnly. "The doctor gave me medicine that tasted terrible," Samuel laughed. "The worst-tasting medicine often works the best." "That's what my mother always said." William seemed to consider this. "Did you bring that?" he asked, pointing to the wooden horse on the table. "William, manners," Margaret reminded him. "It's all right," Samuel said. "Yes, I did. Do you like horses?" William's face lit up. "I love horses. Mama says we can't have one, but I'm going to when I grow up." "Well, until then, perhaps this one will do." Samuel handed the toy to William, who accepted it with reverent hands. "Thank you, Mr. Samuel." He looked up at his mother. "Can I show him my drawings?" Margaret glanced at Samuel, who nodded. "Maybe after dinner, if you eat well and rest until then." William reluctantly agreed and returned to his room, but not before giving Samuel a shy smile. Margaret turned to the stove, where a pot of stew was simmering. "He doesn't usually take to strangers so quickly." "Children have good instincts about people," Samuel replied, leaning against the doorframe. "Something we tend to lose as we grow older." "Do you have children of your own?" Margaret asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. "No, madam, never married." Samuel watched as she stirred the stew. "May I help with anything? You can set the table if you'd like. Plates are in that cupboard." She pointed with her wooden spoon. They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes, moving around each other in the small kitchen with surprising ease. "How long have you been on your own?" Samuel asked as he placed the plates on the table. Margaret measured her answer carefully. "Thomas died 2 years ago." "Mining accident at the Silver Creek mine." "I'm sorry to hear that." His voice was genuine. "The mines around here have taken too many good men." "Yes, they have." She brought the pot to the table. "William was only 3 when it happened. Some days I think he's starting to forget his father." Samuel pulled out her chair for her. "Then you'll have to keep telling him stories about Thomas. Keep his memory alive." Margaret sat, touched by his understanding. "I try to. It's just hard sometimes." Samuel took the seat across from her. "I lost my father when I was 10. Old enough to remember him clearly, but not old enough to understand why he had to go fight in a war so far away." "The Civil War," he nodded. "He believed in the Union cause, died at Gettysburg." Margaret called William to the table, and they ate together, the conversation flowing more easily than she would have expected. Samuel told stories of his life on the ranch that made William laugh and had Margaret hanging on every word. He described cattle drives and the beauty of the open range at sunrise, painting pictures with words that made her see places she'd never been. After dinner, true to his word, William brought out his drawings to show Samuel, who examined each one with genuine interest. Margaret watched them together, something warm unfurling in her chest at the sight of her son smiling and animated for the first time in days. When William was finally tucked back into bed, Samuel helped Margaret clear the table. "He's a fine boy," Samuel said, handing her the last plate to dry. "You've done well with him." "Thank you." She set the plate down and turned to face him. "Samuel, I want to repay you for the doctor's bill. I can't do it all at once, but there's no rush," he interrupted gently. "And honestly, seeing that boy on the mend is payment enough." Margaret shook her head. "I need to do this. I've been on my own long enough to know that debts have a way of becoming burdens on both sides if they're not settled." Samuel studied her face, respect evident in his eyes. "All right, when you can then. No interest, no timeline. Thank you." She hesitated, then added, "How much longer will you be in Eureka?" "I'd planned to leave tomorrow, but—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I think I might stay a while longer, make sure William's fully recovered." Margaret felt both relieved and wary. "That's very kind, but unnecessary. We've already taken up too much of your time." "Time is something I have plenty of at the moment." He smiled, reaching for his hat. "The Diamond G can spare me for a bit. I told my boss I might need to stay in town on some personal business." As she walked him to the door, Margaret realized she didn't want him to leave. His presence had brought something into her home that had been missing for too long, not just a man's strength, but laughter and stories and a feeling of safety. "Would you like to join us for dinner again tomorrow?" She found herself asking. Samuel's smile reached his eyes. "I'd like that very much." After he left, Margaret stood at the window, watching his tall figure disappear down the dark street. For the first time in 2 years, she felt something other than grief and worry, a flutter of possibility that both frightened and exhilarated her. The next morning, Margaret was kneeling in her small garden behind the house, trying to salvage what vegetables the drought hadn't claimed, when a shadow fell across the withered tomato plants. She looked up to find Samuel standing there, work gloves in one hand and a water bucket in the other. "Thought you might appreciate some help," he said, gesturing to the garden. "I noticed your pump looked like it might be sticking." Margaret sat back on her heels, wiping a strand of hair from her forehead. "You don't have to do this. I know." He set the bucket down. "But that's what neighbors do, isn't it? Help each other. Are we neighbors now?" She couldn't help the small smile that curved her lips. "For the time being." He crouched down beside her. "These tomatoes might be salvageable with some water and care." They worked side by side through the morning, Samuel repairing the pump while Margaret tended to the garden. William sat on the back step, still weak but eager to watch and occasionally offer advice that made both adults smile. By midday, the garden looked considerably better, and Samuel had fixed not only the pump but a loose shutter and a step on the back porch that had been wobbly for months. "You're handy with tools," Margaret observed as they sat in the shade, drinking the lemonade she'd prepared. "Comes with ranch life. If something breaks, you fix it yourself or go without." He wiped his brow with a handkerchief. "Your husband was a miner, yes, but he could turn his hand to carpentry as well. He built that shelving inside." Her voice softened at the memory. "He had plans to add a proper porch across the front of the house. Never got the chance." Samuel looked at the house thoughtfully. "It's a good, solid structure. Deserves a proper porch. Maybe someday." Margaret watched as William carefully watered the newly revived tomato plants. "Right now, I'm just trying to keep a roof over our heads." "What kind of work do you do?" Samuel asked. "Sewing, mostly. I take in mending and occasionally make dresses for the women in town." She sighed. "It's barely enough, especially with William getting sick." Samuel's eyes moved to William, who was now sitting in the dirt, making roads for his wooden horse. "Have you considered leaving Eureka? Going somewhere with more opportunities?" Margaret nodded. "Many times, but it takes money to start over somewhere new, and this was our home with Thomas." "All our memories are here." "Memories matter," Samuel agreed, "but so does having enough to eat." The frank assessment should have offended her, but Margaret appreciated his honesty. "True enough. But for now we manage." They fell into a comfortable silence, watching William play. It struck Margaret how natural it felt having Samuel there, as if he belonged in her small backyard, in the quiet routine of her life. Later that afternoon, Samuel left to attend to some business in town, promising to return for dinner. Margaret found herself hurrying through her chores, anticipating his return with an eagerness that both surprised and concerned her. When he arrived that evening, he brought a small package of hard candies for William, and more surprisingly, a bolt of blue calico fabric for Margaret. "I noticed your dress was wearing thin at the cuffs," he explained when she protested the gift. "Thought maybe you could use this for yourself for once, instead of sewing for others." The gesture touched her deeply. How long had it been since anyone had noticed what she needed? Even such a small thing seemed monumental after years of focusing solely on William's needs. Over dinner, Samuel shared his plans to help the livery stable owner repair some stalls the following day. "He's paying me a fair wage for it, enough to extend my stay a bit longer." "Are you looking for permanent work in Eureka?" Margaret asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "Not exactly, but I'm not in a hurry to get back to the Diamond G either." His eyes met hers across the table. "I find myself enjoying the company here." William, who had been quietly eating, looked up. "Are you going to stay with us, Mr. Samuel?" Margaret felt her cheeks warm. "William, Mr. Morris has his own accommodations at the boarding house." Samuel laughed, easing the moment. "I am indeed staying at Mrs. Peterson's boarding house, William, but I'm glad to visit you and your mother when I'm welcome." "You're always welcome," William declared with the absolute certainty of childhood. Margaret caught Samuel's gaze again, seeing the silent question there. "Yes," she said softly. "You are welcome here, Samuel." The days stretched into a week, and Samuel's presence in their lives became a welcome constant. He would stop by in the mornings before heading to whatever odd job he'd found in town, sometimes bringing fresh bread from the bakery or a piece of penny candy for William. In the evenings, he often joined them for dinner, and afterward would sit on the back step with Margaret while William slept, talking about everything and nothing as the stars appeared overhead. Margaret learned that Samuel had been a cowboy for 12 years, working his way up from ranch hand to foreman. He'd fought in a few range wars, had broken more bones than he could count, and had once spent 3 days lost in a blizzard before finding his way back to the ranch. He spoke of his mother, still alive in Missouri, and his two brothers, one a shopkeeper in Kansas City, the other a preacher in Colorado. In turn, she told him about growing up in Ohio, moving west with her parents when she was 16, meeting Thomas when she was 18. She described her wedding day, the early years of her marriage, the joy of William's birth, and finally, the crushing grief of Thomas's death. "I never thought I'd laugh again after we buried him," she admitted one evening as they sat beneath a sky scattered with stars. But life has a way of pushing forward, doesn't it? Especially when you have a child depending on you. Samuel nodded, his face thoughtful in the dim light. "You're stronger than you know, Margaret." The way he said her name sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cool evening air. They sat close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his arm, though they weren't touching. "Samuel," she began hesitantly, "why are you really still in Eureka? Surely the Diamond G needs its foreman back." He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "I sent a letter to my boss last week asking for an extended leave. Told him I had personal matters to attend to. And do you have personal matters here?" Samuel turned to face her, his eyes serious in the moonlight. "I think I might, if I'm welcome to pursue them." Margaret's heart thundered in her chest. She knew what he was asking, not just about staying in Eureka, but about the possibility of something growing between them. Part of her wanted to retreat, to protect the fragile peace she'd built for herself and William. But another part, a part she'd thought long dormant, stirred to life under his steady gaze. "I've been alone a long time," she said carefully. "I'm not sure I remember how to be anything else." "I'm not asking for promises, Margaret, just permission to see where this might lead." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. "I haven't felt this way in a very long time, maybe never." The touch of his hand sent warmth spiraling through her. How long had it been since she'd been touched with such tenderness? William hugged her daily, but the simple contact of Samuel's hand holding hers was something altogether different, a connection between a man and a woman, fraught with possibility. "People will talk," she whispered. Samuel's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Let them. We're not doing anything wrong." "No," she agreed, her fingers tightening around his. "We're not." That night, after Samuel had gone back to his boarding house, Margaret lay awake staring at the ceiling. Her hand still seemed to tingle where he had held it. She wondered what Thomas would think of this development. Would he understand that her heart, which had belonged wholly to him, was beginning to make room for someone new? Or would he see it as a betrayal? "I'll always love you," she whispered into the darkness, as if her late husband might hear. "But I can't be alone forever." The next day, Samuel arrived at their door with an unexpected proposal. "I spoke with Mr. Henderson at the livery," he said as they walked toward town together, William running ahead of them. "He's looking to sell the business. His rheumatism is getting worse and his son doesn't want it." Margaret glanced at him curiously. "Are you thinking of buying it?" "I might be." His eyes were focused on William, who was now crouched down examining something on the path. "I've saved a good amount over the years. Never had much to spend it on out on the range." The implication hung in the air between them. Buying the livery would mean staying in Eureka permanently. It would mean putting down roots, something she suspected Samuel hadn't done in a very long time, if ever. "It's a big decision," she said carefully. "Giving up the life you know. Some changes are worth making." He looked down at her, his expression open. "If there's reason enough to make them." Before she could respond, William came running back, clutching a colorful rock he'd found. The moment passed, but Margaret felt its weight throughout the day as she worked on mending Mrs. Lawson's tablecloth. That evening, Samuel didn't come for dinner. Instead, a note arrived, delivered by the livery stable boy. "Margaret, business with Henderson is taking longer than expected. Don't wait dinner for me. I'll call on you tomorrow if that's agreeable. Yours. Samuel. The simple yours at the end of the note made her heart skip a beat. She tucked the note into her pocket, aware of the foolish smile she couldn't seem to suppress. William was disappointed by Samuel's absence, picking at his food and asking repeatedly when Mr. Samuel would return. He has business to attend to, William. He'll visit tomorrow. She tried to keep her voice neutral, not wanting her son to sense her own disappointment. Is Mr. Samuel going to be my new papa? William asked suddenly, his young face serious. Margaret nearly dropped her fork. William, what makes you ask such a thing? The boy shrugged. Jimmy Taylor got a new papa after his old one died. And Mr. Samuel looks at you the way Jimmy's new papa looks at his mama. Heat rose to Margaret's cheeks. Mr. Samuel is our friend, William, that's all. But you like him, William persisted with a child's direct perception. And he likes you. I heard Mrs. Peterson tell Mrs. Davis that Mr. Samuel is sweet on you. It's not polite to listen to others' conversations, Margaret said, evading the statement. Now finish your supper. Later, after William was asleep, Margaret sat by the window with her mending, thinking about her son's question. The idea of Samuel becoming a permanent part of their lives both thrilled and terrified her. She'd learned the hard way how quickly happiness could be snatched away. Opening her heart again meant risking that pain once more, but wasn't living in fear of loss its own kind of pain. The next morning, Margaret was sweeping the front step when Dr. Anderson's buggy pulled up outside her house. Her heart immediately clenched with worry had William's fever returned without her noticing, but the doctor was smiling as he approached. Good morning, Mrs. Keller. Don't worry, I'm not here on medical business. Dr. Anderson, she greeted him, setting her broom aside. What can I do for you? Actually, I came to deliver some news and a message. He removed his hat. I've just come from the livery where I witnessed the sale of Henderson's business to Mr. Morris. Margaret's breath caught. So he bought it. Indeed he did. Paid a fair price, too. The doctor's eyes twinkled. He asked me to tell you he'll be by this afternoon to share the news himself, but he's tied up with the paperwork and inventory until then. I see, Margaret said, her mind racing with the implications. Thank you for letting me know. One more thing, Doctor. Anderson added, his expression becoming more serious. I've known you since you arrived in Eureka, Margaret, seen you through childbirth and widowhood. I hope you don't mind an old man speaking frankly. Margaret tensed slightly. Not at all, Doctor. Samuel Morris is a good man. One of the best I've encountered in my 30 years of practice. He placed his hat back on his head, and I've not seen you look this alive since before Thomas passed. Margaret felt tears prick at her eyes. It's too soon, she whispered. Isn't it? Dr. Anderson's gaze was kind. The heart knows its own timetable, my dear, and 2 years is not so very soon. He tipped his hat. Good day, Mrs. Keller. As the doctor drove away, Margaret remained on the step, her mind whirling. Samuel had bought the livery. He was staying in Eureka. For her, for them. The possibility both exhilarated and frightened her. When Samuel arrived that afternoon, William was playing in the backyard while Margaret worked on a dress commission. She heard his knock and smoothed her hair before opening the door. The smile that spread across his face at the sight of her sent warmth flowing through her veins. I hear congratulations are in order, she said, stepping aside to let him in. Dr. Anderson told me about the livery. News travels fast, Samuel said with a chuckle. Yes, it's official as of this morning. I'm the new owner of Henderson's livery stable, though we'll be changing the name soon enough. Margaret offered him a seat at the kitchen table. It's a big change from being a ranch foreman. Change can be good. His eyes held hers steadily. I've been thinking about putting down roots for some time now. Have you? She busied herself pouring him a cup of coffee. Margaret. The way he said her name made her look up. I didn't buy the livery on a whim. I bought it because I want to stay in Eureka. Because in the past 2 weeks, I've found something here I didn't even know I was looking for. Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she set the coffee cup in front of him. And what's that? A reason to stop wandering. He reached out and took her hand. You and William. The way I feel when I'm with you both. Margaret sat down across from him, her heart pounding. Samuel, you don't have to say anything now, he interrupted gently. I know this is sudden. I know you've been through so much. I just wanted you to understand why I'm staying. She looked down at their joined hands. I'm afraid, she admitted in a small voice. Not of you, but of feeling this way again, of losing someone else I care for. Life offers no guarantees, Margaret. All we can do is make the most of the time we have. His thumb traced circles on her palm. I'm not asking for any decisions today. Just the chance to court you properly if you'll allow it. Court her. The old-fashioned phrase made her smile despite her nervousness. I think I'd like that, she said softly. The smile that lit his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Good. That's real good. William chose that moment to burst through the back door, face dirty from playing. He stopped short when he saw Samuel, then broke into a wide grin. Mr. Samuel, did you bring your horse today? Can I see the livery stable? Mama says you bought it. Samuel laughed, releasing Margaret's hand to ruffle William's hair. I did indeed buy it, and yes, you can visit once I've got things in order, and my name is just Samuel, remember? William nodded seriously. Samuel, are you staying in Eureka now, forever? Samuel glanced at Margaret, his eyes warm. That's the plan, young man. That's the plan. The weeks that followed took on a new rhythm. Samuel would work at the livery during the day while Margaret attended to her sewing and household duties. In the evenings, he would often join them for dinner, and afterward would help William with his reading or work alongside Margaret on small repairs around the house. On Sundays, they would attend church together, ignoring the speculative glances and whispered comments from the townspeople. Afterward, Samuel would join them for Sunday dinner, sometimes bringing special treats like store-bought pies or candies for William. Margaret found herself looking forward to these simple routines, to the sound of Samuel's boots on the porch steps, to the deep rumble of his voice as he read to William, to the brush of his fingers against hers as they washed dishes side by side. One evening in early October, after William had gone to bed, Samuel suggested they sit on the front step to enjoy the crisp autumn air. The stars were particularly bright, and a sliver of moon hung low in the sky. The livery's doing well, Samuel said as they settled side by side on the step. Better than I expected, actually. Henderson hadn't been keeping up with potential business from the mines. That's wonderful. Margaret pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders as a cool breeze swept past. Samuel noticed and shifted closer, his arm coming around her shoulders. The gesture was new, and Margaret tensed momentarily before relaxing into his warmth. I've been thinking, Samuel said, his voice low. The house behind the livery, the one that comes with the business, it's bigger than this one, has 3 bedrooms and a proper kitchen. Margaret tilted her head to look at him. Yes, I was thinking it's too big for just one person. His arm tightened slightly around her. Margaret, I know it hasn't been very long, but I want you to know my intentions. Her heart began to race. Your intentions. Samuel shifted to face her, taking both her hands in his. I love you, Margaret Keller. I love William too. I want to marry you if you'll have me. I want us to be a family. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. Though she'd begun to suspect his feelings ran this deep, hearing the words spoken aloud made them real in a way that stole her voice momentarily. You don't have to answer now, Samuel continued, misinterpreting her silence. I know it's soon, and I know Thomas will always have a place in your heart, as he should. I just wanted you to know where I stand." Margaret found her voice at last. "Samuel, she swallowed hard. I care for you deeply, more than I thought possible after Thomas. But marriage is a big step, especially for William. William already treats me like I hung the moon," Samuel said with a gentle smile. "That boy has room in his heart for both the father he lost and a new one who loves him like his own." Tears sprang to Margaret's eyes. "You truly care for him that much?" "As much as if he were my own blood," Samuel said firmly. "Margaret, I've lived a solitary life for most of my years, never thought much about family or settling down. But these past weeks with you and William, they've shown me what I've been missing. I don't want to miss it any longer." Margaret looked into his earnest face. This man who had walked into their lives when they needed help most, and had stayed to offer so much more than financial assistance. He'd brought laughter back into their home, had fixed broken things both physical and emotional, had given William a male presence that the boy clearly craved, and he'd awakened feelings in her that she'd thought were buried with Thomas. "Yes," she whispered, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "Yes, I'll marry you, Samuel." The joy that spread across his face was like nothing she'd ever seen. He pulled her close, one hand cradling the back of her head as he pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened with the release of long, restrained emotion. When they finally parted, both breathless, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "I promise you won't regret this, Margaret. I'll spend every day making sure of it." "I know," she said, and realized she truly did know it, deep in her soul. This good, kind man would keep his word. He would love her and William with the same steady strength he brought to everything he did. They decided to marry before winter set in. The announcement at church the following Sunday caused a stir of excitement through the congregation. Despite some initial gossiping about the relative speed of their courtship, most of the town seemed genuinely happy for them, especially those who remembered how Margaret had struggled after Thomas's death. William was ecstatic at the news, especially when Samuel explained that they would be moving into the larger house behind the livery, where William would have his own room and be able to help with the horses. "And will you be my papa now?" William asked Samuel directly, his young face serious. Samuel crouched down to the boy's level. "I would be honored to be your papa, William, but only if that's what you want. And it doesn't mean forgetting your first father. He'll always be a part of you." William considered this solemnly, then nodded. "I think my first papa would like you. He always said a man should take care of his family." Margaret, watching this exchange, felt her eyes fill with tears. Out of the worst time in her life, nearly losing William to illness, facing financial ruin, had come this unexpected blessing. A second chance at love and family. The wedding took place on a bright October afternoon. Margaret wore a new dress of deep blue that she'd made herself from the fabric Samuel had given her weeks earlier. William stood proudly at Samuel's side as his best man, while Mrs. Peterson served as Margaret's matron of honor. The entire town seemed to turn out for the celebration. Dr. Anderson raised a toast at the small reception held at the hotel dining room, speaking of how a chance meeting during a time of crisis had led to this joyful union. "Sometimes," the doctor said, his eyes twinkling, "the greatest blessings come disguised as our darkest moments." As Margaret looked around at the smiling faces of her neighbors, at William beaming with pride in his new suit, and most of all, at Samuel watching her with such love in his eyes, she knew the doctor's words were true. That night, after they had moved their few belongings into the house behind the livery and tucked an exhausted William into his new bed, Margaret stood nervously in the bedroom she would now share with Samuel. Despite her love for him, she couldn't help feeling apprehensive about this aspect of their new life together. When Samuel entered the room, he seemed to sense her anxiety immediately. "We can go as slow as you need, Margaret," he said gently. "Nothing has to happen tonight if you're not ready." His consideration nearly undid her. "It's not that I don't want to," she explained, twisting her hands together. "It's just been a long time, and I'm not sure if I remember how to be a wife that way." Samuel crossed the room and took her hands in his. "Then we'll remember together." He kissed her softly. "We have all the time in the world." His patience and tenderness gradually eased her nervousness. As the night deepened, Margaret discovered that some things the body doesn't forget, and that love can make even the familiar feel wonderfully new again. In the weeks and months that followed, they settled into their life as a family. Samuel proved to be not only a good businessman but a patient father to William, teaching him to ride a gentle mare and involving him in age-appropriate tasks around the livery. Margaret continued her sewing, though now it was more for pleasure than necessity as the livery provided a stable income. Winter came to Eureka, bringing snow that transformed the dusty streets into a white wonderland that delighted William. Christmas was celebrated in their new home with a proper tree, and presents beneath it, the first truly joyful holiday Margaret had experienced since losing Thomas. As they sat before the fire that Christmas evening, William already asleep surrounded by his new toys, Samuel pulled Margaret close against his side. "Happy?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "More than I ever thought possible again," she answered truthfully. "Thank you for not giving up when I tried to refuse your help that day at the doctor's office," Samuel chuckled. "Stubbornness has its uses sometimes." Margaret turned in his arms to face him. "I have something to tell you, a Christmas gift that couldn't be wrapped." His eyebrows rose questioningly. "I saw Dr. Anderson yesterday while you were delivering that wagon to the Peterson ranch." She took a deep breath, suddenly nervous. "I'm going to have a baby in early summer." Samuel's face went blank with shock for a moment before breaking into a smile of such radiant joy that it took her breath away. "A baby," he whispered, his hand going to her still flat stomach. "Our baby," Margaret nodded, her own eyes filling with happy tears at his reaction. "I wasn't sure how you'd feel, given that we haven't been married very long and with William already." "Feel? Margaret, I'm over the moon." He pulled her into a fierce embrace. "Another child to love, another piece of you and me together." As he held her close, whispering plans and dreams for their expanding family, Margaret marveled at how life could change so completely in such a short time. From the desperate mother who couldn't pay a doctor's bill to the beloved wife, expecting a new child with the man who had saved not just her son's life, but her own heart as well. When spring arrived in Eureka, bringing wildflowers to the mountains and new foals to the livery stable, Margaret's condition was becoming obvious. William was excited about becoming a big brother, already making plans for all the things he would teach the baby. Samuel was attentive to the point of hovering, insisting Margaret rest frequently and bringing her special treats from town. His protective instincts, she discovered, were even stronger now that she was carrying his child. "You're going to spoil me," Margaret protested one afternoon as Samuel insisted on doing the dishes while she rested in a chair. "You deserve spoiling," he replied, kissing the top of her head as he passed. "Besides, Dr. Anderson said you need your rest." "Dr. Anderson also said I'm healthy as a horse and could probably deliver this baby standing up if I had to." She reminded him with a laugh. Samuel grimaced. "Let's not test that theory." One evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, William playing with the neighbor's children nearby, Samuel took Margaret's hand. "I've been thinking," he began, his thumb tracing circles on her palm as he often did when thoughtful. "William starts school this fall," Margaret nodded. "He's excited about it, especially since you taught him his letters so well. With you less busy with him during the day and a new baby to care for." Samuel hesitated. "Would you consider taking on a different kind of work?" She looked at him curiously. "What kind of work?" "The livery's books." He smiled at her surprised expression. "You're better with numbers than I am, and I've seen how you manage our household accounts. The business is growing, and I could use the help. We could set up a small office for you where you could work while the baby naps." Margaret considered the idea. She'd never imagined working alongside Samuel in his business, but the prospect was intriguing. "You truly think I could do it?" "I know you could." His confidence in her warmed her heart. "You're the smartest person I know, Margaret. And it would mean we could be together more during the day." The idea of contributing to their family business, of using her mind for something beyond household management, appealed to her deeply. "I'd like that," she decided. "Very much." Samuel's face lit with pleasure. "Good. We'll start getting things set up next week." As May turned to June, the heat intensified and Margaret's time grew near. Samuel hired a young boy from town to help more at the livery so he could be available when Margaret needed him. On a sweltering afternoon in late June, as William was visiting a friend and Samuel was shoeing a horse, Margaret felt the first strong contraction. She called for Samuel, who appeared in the doorway moments later, still holding a horseshoe nail. One look at her face told him everything. "It's time," Margaret nodded, another contraction building. "Send for Dr. Anderson." What followed was a blur of activity and pain. Samuel sent his young helper racing for the doctor, helped Margaret to their bed, and brought water and towels as she'd prepared weeks before. Dr. Anderson arrived quickly, his experienced eyes assessing the situation as Samuel paced anxiously. "This isn't her first child, Mr. Morris," the doctor reminded him calmly. "And she's strong as they come. Why don't you wait outside? I'll call if we need you." But Margaret gripped Samuel's hand. "Stay," she whispered through gritted teeth. "Please." And so he stayed through the long hours that followed, wiping her brow, supporting her back, murmuring encouragement as she labored to bring their child into the world. Unlike many men who would have fled the birthing room, Samuel remained steadfast, his love for Margaret evident in every tender gesture. As the first light of dawn filtered through the curtains, Margaret gave one final push, and their daughter slipped into the world with a lusty cry that filled the room. "A girl," Dr. Anderson announced, quickly cleaning and wrapping the infant before placing her in Margaret's arms. "A beautiful, healthy girl." Samuel stared in wonder at the tiny red face of his daughter, tears streaming unashamedly down his cheeks. "She's perfect," he whispered, touching one finger to the baby's small hand. "Just like her mother." Margaret looked up at her husband, exhaustion and joy mingling on her face. "We have a daughter, Samuel. We do." He pressed his lips to her forehead. "Thank you for this gift for our family." They named her Sarah Elizabeth Morris, honoring both Samuel's mother and Margaret's. William was cautiously fascinated by his tiny sister, studying her with the serious concentration of a 7-year-old trying to understand a new responsibility. "She's very small," he observed as Margaret showed him how to hold the baby, Samuel hovering protectively nearby. "She'll grow," Margaret assured him, "and she'll need her big brother to look out for her." William nodded solemnly. "I will, I promise." As summer gave way to fall and Sarah grew plumper and more alert, their family settled into a new routine. William started school, proudly carrying the new slate Samuel had bought him. Margaret, once Sarah was sleeping more regularly, began working on the livery's books for a few hours each day, discovering a talent for business that surprised even her. Samuel's prediction about the livery's growth proved accurate. With the mines operating at full capacity and new settlers arriving regularly, the demand for good horses, wagon repairs, and boarding facilities increased steadily. By Christmas, they were discussing the possibility of expanding, perhaps hiring another full-time worker. On Christmas Eve, with Sarah asleep in her cradle and William playing with the wooden soldiers Samuel had carved for him, Margaret and Samuel sat before the fire, reflecting on the year gone by. "Do you remember last Christmas?" Margaret asked, nestled against Samuel's chest. "When I told you about Sarah, best Christmas gift I ever received," he said, his arm tightening around her. "Until now." She looked up at him curiously. "What do you mean?" Samuel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "I wanted to wait until we were alone." Margaret opened it to find a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. Inside was a tiny photograph of William and Sarah together, their faces solemn in the way of studio portraits. "Oh, Samuel," she breathed, touching the locket with gentle fingers. "It's beautiful. But when did you?" "Last month when I took William to Carson City for supplies." He took the locket from her hands and fastened it around her neck. "I wanted you to be able to keep them close to your heart, even when they're not with you." Margaret touched the locket where it lay against her skin. "I never imagined being this happy again," she admitted softly. "After Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over. That all I could hope for was to survive and raise William as best I could. And now I know that life can surprise you, that love can find you when you least expect it, even in the most desperate circumstances." She turned to face him fully. "You didn't just settle our bill that day at the doctor's office, Samuel. You gave us a future." Samuel cupped her face in his hands, his eyes filled with the same wonder she felt. "You gave me a home, Margaret, something I'd never truly had before." As he lowered his lips to hers, the fire crackling beside them and their children sleeping peacefully nearby, Margaret knew with absolute certainty that this was where she belonged. In this house, with this man, surrounded by the family they had built together from circumstances that once seemed hopeless. From the depths of fear and desperation had come a love that would sustain them through whatever challenges life might bring, a love born when a cowboy settled not just a doctor's bill, but a place in her heart that would be his forever. 10 years later, on a bright spring morning, Margaret stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching Samuel teach their youngest son, 4-year-old Thomas, to ride his first pony. Sarah, now a willowy 9-year-old with her father's blue eyes and her mother's chestnut hair, sat nearby sketching the scene with remarkable talent for a child her age. And William, 17 and nearly as tall as Samuel, worked confidently in the livery yard, his skill with horses already surpassing many men twice his age. The livery had grown into the most successful business of its kind in 3 counties, expanded twice to accommodate increased demand. Margaret still managed the books, having discovered a head for business that had helped guide their prosperity. They had added a small general store to the property 3 years earlier, specializing in quality tack and equipment that drew customers from miles around. As Thomas let out a whoop of delight at staying on the pony's back, Samuel looked up and caught Margaret's eye across the yard. The love in his gaze was as strong as it had been on their wedding day, perhaps even stronger now, tempered and deepened by the years they had shared. Samuel lifted Thomas from the pony and set him on his feet, ruffling the boy's hair before crossing the yard to join Margaret on the porch. "He's a natural," Samuel said with pride, slipping an arm around her waist, "just like his brother." "And his father," Margaret added, leaning into his embrace. Samuel kissed her temple, a gesture as familiar and essential as breathing after all these years together. Have I told you today how much I love you?" Margaret smiled up at him, the gold locket he'd given her that long ago Christmas still hanging around her neck, now containing miniature portraits of all three children. "You have, but I never tire of hearing it." "Good," he murmured against her hair. "Because I plan to keep saying it for at least another 50 years. As their children's laughter filled the yard, and the spring breeze carried the scent of wildflowers and promise, Margaret knew that the desperate young widow at the doctor's office could never have imagined this future. How a moment of kindness from a passing cowboy could grow into a lifetime of love, a thriving business, and 3 beautiful children. Life had taken her down unexpected paths, from joy to grief and back to joy again. But standing here in the circle of Samuel's arms, watching their children flourish in the home they had built together, Margaret knew she wouldn't change a single step of the journey. For it had led her here, to this moment, to this love that had been born when she couldn't pay a doctor's bill, and a cowboy had settled not just the debt, but her heart.